Just as the Conservatives lose hundreds of council seats, Sir Keir Starmer faces a new investigation into a lockdown curry. Should he be preparing to rule or to resign? The leader of the opposition proclaimed turning points for his party, but could find himself cornered by his own Partygate attacks on the PM.
We now have the shameful spectacle of a Prime Minister of the United Kingdom being subject to a police investigation. The police obviously have got their job to do, we should let them get on with it, but I'm confident that no rules were broken.
And yet Conservative performance in these elections was poor, consistent with losing a general election, relegated to third place in Scotland, losing some landmark councils and facing a significant challenge in its heartlands from the Liberal Democrats. And where now to for the United Kingdom after victories in 2 of its nations for parties that want to end the Union. We have a full cast of politicians and experts to bring you the latest, including that political earthquake from Northern Ireland where the count is still going on.
Here at Stormont, they're preparing for a new reality. Sinn Féin, the party that doesn't even use the name Northern Ireland, is on course to be the biggest party in the Assembly.
The counts continue, but the fog is clearing. Today's results raise some fundamental questions about both main parties, a series of political realignments, the policies to help millions of households through a rocky economic road, and about the existence of the UK itself. Boris Johnson's Conservatives have lost hundreds, 486 councillors at the last count, with 3 councils to go, something his own defeated leaders blamed on Partygate and the cost of living crisis. The numbers suggest Labour would have won by 5% if this was a national poll. Progress in some areas, especially London and Wales, but not enough to definitively turn the tide on 2019. The Lib Dems enjoyed some spectacular successes, as did the Greens, with the SNP consolidating its position in Scotland. But the losses have not been enough so far to ignite rebellion among Boris Johnson's key electorate right now, Conservative backbenchers. And tonight, with news that the police are reinvestigating Sir Keir Starmer's attendance at a curry during lockdown, some of the PM's backers are daring to believe they can neutralise the painful issue of Partygate. With me to go through this patchwork of results that seem to leave the nation under no overall control is Nick Watt, our political editor. Nick, good to see you. What is the latest?
Well, Faisal, look, these are mid-term local elections, and often what can happen is at this time on a Friday after polling day, we're all very excited and then they fizzle out. But these ones really matter because they tell us 2 big things. They tell us in the first place about the future of the Prime Minister of the UK and the pretender to that throne, but they also tell us potentially a lot about the future of the UK. So let's look at the Prime Minister. I would say for the 2 main parties, Labour and the Conservatives, I say for them the results are somewhere between OK and not great. And interestingly, as the day wore on, the results became increasingly bad for the Conservatives, talking of around about 500 seat losses. Now, independent pollsters, respected impartial people, were saying that they expected these losses to be somewhere between 200 and 300, so it's much higher than that. The Conservatives were setting the bar at 800 losses beforehand. As you would, that really was pushing the limits of expectation management. One member of the Cabinet to reach that figure a few weeks ago was telling me that the Conservatives were going to lose Kensington and Chelsea. I don't think anyone thought there'd be a red flag over Sloane Square. For the Labour Party, big symbolic wins in London, Wandsworth and Westminster and Barnet, and symbolic wins in the Red Wall, Cumberland up in the northwest. But this absolutely does not look like an opposition party on the point of a breakthrough that would take Keir Starmer into number 10. The big thing, second big thing today, the future of the UK. As you were saying, SNP, as expected, first place in Scotland. Big significant story though. Sinn Féin first place on first preference votes in the Northern Ireland Assembly. Highly likely that they'll be the largest party. We won't find that out until tomorrow. And obviously that means that Sinn Féin will be entitled to be First Minister. Big questions for the future of unionism.
And we'll come back to that. And then on the crucial issue of both Boris Johnson's backbenchers, what has this sparked, and Keir Starmer and that police investigation?
Well, Boris Johnson is safe for the moment. I was speaking this evening to one of his critics and they were saying that what has happened in these elections will not trigger a challenge to him. Do you remember, it's not that long ago this was going to be the big moment, although this person did say if there are more police fines that could be difficult for him. The view in number 10 is these results were not fantastic, but they were not bad. They're worried and unhappy about the London results. They think a lot of criticism of the campaign there, but they're pretty confident in number 10 that the Conservative vote in those Brexit-leaning areas in the north, which voted for Boris Johnson in 2019, they believe that fundamentally that vote is holding up. Boris Johnson's mood today, I was told it's not jubilant. No balloons for him today. It was a normal constituency visit. As it was put to me, decided there should be no helicopter ride around the country. That would have been seen as hollow. For Keir Starmer, he set himself one fundamental test to show that he's made progress on the 2019 general election, and he would say he's absolutely passed that test. His problem now is, as you're saying, he now has a headache over the so-called Beergate controversy. His problem is he has spent the last few months almost defining his leadership on criticising Boris Johnson over Partygate. He would dispute that. He'd say it's now cost of living, but I sat through plenty of Prime Minister's questions where that was the big thing he talked about. And what has happened now? Well, the police have come knocking at his door.
Have you heard from Durham Police, Sir Keir? Any comment on their investigation?
Stumped for words.
Have you heard from the
A
police,
frequent
Keir?
sight amongst those in power. A rare sight for those out of power.
Fantastic!
It was meant to be a political victory lap. But the police will now launch a full investigation into whether Sir Keir Starmer broke COVID rules during last year's election campaign. A grainy picture of the Labour leader nursing a beer at the end of a day of campaigning has led to Tory calls for a police investigation. New evidence prompted them to act. And this evening, Sir Keir defended himself. This was a meal for hard-working campaigners.
Well, as I've explained a number of times, we were working in the office, we stopped for something to eat, no party, no breach of the rules. The police obviously have got their job to do, we should let them get on with it, but I'm confident that no rules were broken. Meanwhile, we've had a really good set of results today.
Sir Keir Starmer is probably the most famous lawyer in the land, and he's convinced that he does not have a legal problem here. But he may have a political problem. He's spent months condemning Boris Johnson over Downing Street parties and even said that the launch of a police investigation should have triggered his resignation. Well, an investigation is exactly what the police announced today. In January this year, the Labour leader tweeted, "The Prime Minister is now under criminal investigations for breaking his own lockdown laws. He needs to do the decent thing and resign." In Nuneaton, a bellwether parliamentary seat where Labour failed to make a breakthrough overnight, the party's supporters were divided.
If he broke the rule, that's fine. Kick him out as well. Simple.
I would forgive more a beer while you are working and with your colleagues, and well, let's hope I'm not caught, rather than party after party and deny it.
And a Conservative MP who called on Boris Johnson to resign earlier this year says it's time for Keir Starmer to have a taste of his own medicine.
A large number of the public are rightly fairly appalled of the news that those in 10 Downing Street weren't sticking to the rules they set for the rest of us during the lockdown. I think the only thing that probably appalls them more than that is the fact that the leader of Her Majesty's opposition, the deputy leader, who've called for resignations and tried to climb onto the moral high ground on this, are now under investigation and appear to have broken the rules themselves.
A leading human rights lawyer wonders what law the Labour leader has broken.
What we know about the event is it happened while the local elections were about to take place. It was in a constituency office, and the Labour Party said that they had to feed people because otherwise at 10 o'clock at night they weren't going to be able to feed them. And I think that, sounds like it was reasonably necessary for work or voluntary services.
A centre-left columnist believes there are questions over the police decision.
They started off saying there's nothing to see here. They investigated, they said they found nothing. And only after, a barrage of front page stories from the Daily Mail and other Tory-friendly newspapers, plus cabinet ministers weighing in as well, do they change their mind. I mean, maybe there is some concrete piece of new evidence that we don't know about. That's always possible. But if not, it's slightly alarming to think that this much political pressure can be applied to a police force.
Basking in early morning glory, in London at least. Within hours, a change in the climate and unexpected political pressure on Labour.
Well, let's go to our policy editor, Lewis Goodall, with his assessment of what the election numbers mean for politics and the direction of the country.
The narrative overnight was the Conservatives hadn't done quite as badly as they might have feared. Well, today that has unravelled rather. Take a look at this. This is just in England. We were saying yesterday that if the Conservatives only lost about 200 to 250 seats overall, that would be a bad night for them. Well, look at this. They're already, just in England alone, down 341 seats. If you add in the Scottish seats and the Welsh seats, it's about 500 seats, approaching 2. By my reckoning, that means that this would be the second worst local election results the Conservatives have had since they entered office in 2010. Let's dig down a little bit more into some of those results. London was spectacular sort of gains really for the Labour Party, completely dominant. The Tories are a bit of an endangered species in many parts of the capital now. Westminster, Wandsworth got a lot of attention, but Westminster, for my money, was even more significant. This had been a Conservative borough dominated since its creation in 1964, since Harold Wilson was Prime Minister, and the Labour Party took it, and they took it handily with 13 seats gained. If you look at elsewhere in the country as well, it wasn't just London the Labour Party did well. Let's take somewhere like Cumberland. In some ways, the Conservatives might worry about this more. They knew that London was trending against them. Cumberland, home of quite a few seats that the Conservative Party won in the so-called Red Wall in 2019, seats like Copeland, which they first won in the by-election in 2017, seats like Carlisle, seats like Barrow, seats like Workington, famous Workington man was a big theme in that election. Well, the Labour Party did very well indeed. 12 seats that they won against the Conservatives, 14. And then there were other places as well. If we look at somewhere like Worthing on the south coast this time, somewhere where the Labour Party has actually had a bit of realignment that's working in its favour. They didn't even have a seat in this borough until 2017, not a single seat on the council, and now it's taken control of the council. 23 seats there, 6 seats gained. Conservatives have lost 5. Doesn't mean that all went the Labour Party's way, and the Labour Party's performance was not especially impressive in many ways. It was just sort of reverting back to its 2018 type performance, doing better than it did in 2019 or in a pretty disastrous set of elections last year in 2021. But there were still some places where the Conservatives were on the advance. So Newcastle under Lyme, again, part of that so-called Red Wall, that infamous place of law. In Staffordshire here, up 7 seats the Conservatives here, Labour down 1 seat. It's a sort of place where, frankly, the Labour Party has just been drifting away from the Labour Party. It had been at a parliamentary level a Labour seat since 1919, but it feels like there are just some of those places, some of those 2019 Conservative gains that are just going to be beyond getting back. And Newcastle under Lyme, seat of Aaron Bell in Parliament now, might be one of them. But it isn't just the Labour Party that was giving the Tory Party trouble yesterday and today. It has been the Liberal Democrats, who've had a really spectacular night in some ways in both Brexit voting and Remain voting areas. Somerset, which is somewhere at a county council level. This was a new unitary council, but at a county council level, the Lib Dems hadn't controlled since 2009, and they took it again, and they took it very handily indeed. 37 gains, Conservative notional losses of 34. Then you go to somewhere like the southeast of England, in Wokingham. John Redwood's constituency, the former Welsh Secretary for the Conservative Party, been dominated by the Conservative Party for year after year after year. The Lib Dems, these sorts of Remain voting places, that realignment that's working in their favour. The Lib Dems are seriously starting to be competitive in swathes of the south of England. Again, particularly the southeast of England. That will really terrify whole swathes of Conservative MPs who haven't had to worry about the Lib Dems for a very long time. But it wasn't just in England that the Conservatives were struggling. If you look at Scotland, look at what happened in Scotland here. The Conservatives were down by 63 seats, basically to every other party's benefit. Let's look at some of them in a bit more detail. So somewhere like the Scottish Borders, for example, a Conservative stronghold, very much a no voting area in the referendum in 2014, and the Conservatives are still on top in overall seats. And remember, they use a proportional system in Scotland, so it's harder to get overall majorities on councils. But if you look at the swing and you look at the percentage loss, the Conservatives down 11%, and that was something that was repeated across Scotland yesterday and today, and has led to their worst performance in Scotland. Certainly for some years. They did very well in 2017. Wales, very similar story. The Labour Party have been completely hegemonic there for a long time, basically since the devolution settlement in 1999. They're continuing to build on the progress they had in the Welsh Senate elections last year, up 65, mainly at the Conservatives' expense. And what will worry the Conservatives is that they are doing particularly badly in places that they won in 2019. So if we look at somewhere like Bridgend, for example, this was a seat, as I say, they won in 2019. 6 seats the Conservatives won in that election off the Labour Party net gains anyway, and Labour took the council, plus 10, Conservatives 12. Essentially, what we learned yesterday is that the Labour Party might not be doing particularly well, the Liberal Democrats are doing quite well, but the Conservatives are certainly doing badly.
Lewis there counting the votes. Now, we had been looking forward to speaking to someone from the Labour Party about these results and the news that Keir Starmer is now facing a new police investigation, but they pulled out this evening and no one else was available. However, we can speak to a member of the government, Farming Minister Victoria Prentice, who joins us now. What are you saying about Sir Keir Starmer's the reinvestigation of this this so-called Beergate situation? Are you suggesting the Leader of the Opposition should resign?
No, I think we should leave the situation as it is with the Durham police. I expect and I hope very much that the Labour Party will cooperate fully with whatever investigations take place, and then we'll review the situation as and when they've made a decision.
Right, well, let's move on to your results. And there was a narrative percolating out there this morning that, a plague on all their houses. But as the day has emerged and we've seen the full set of results, you cannot say anything other than nearly 500 losses of councillors, of your councillors, is anything but a poor set of results, Victoria Prentice.
Well, it's a really mixed bag of results, and it's very hard to drill down into finding narrative threads. I thought your correspondent made a really good fist of it. But what we have to remember is that these are local results. There will be local issues at play in very many cases. And though undoubtedly we had a tough time in London, we also did well in Harrow, for example, really well. And we've seen good, solid results in areas all over the country: Sunderland, Tyneside, Newcastle-under-Lyme, as you referenced.
Forgive me, Victoria Prentice. I hear the script, the same script from this morning, but news has happened since then, which is that you've lost nearly 500 seats. Are you in denial about having lost nearly 500 seats?
No, and this is certainly not a script. I've spent all day, all afternoon at the count in my local seat. And it's always really sad when good local councillors are not re-elected. And I think it's important that we should keep remembering that these are local elections about local councillors, people who actually deal with potholes and bins and planning decisions, difficult decisions locally. And we shouldn't try and extrapolate too many national trends. I know it's always tempting. There are very, very low turnouts in many of these elections. And I think it's very hard to make real concrete guesses as to how
Ms. Prentice, we're tempted by your own colleagues in local government, like Ravi Govinda, the leader of Wandsworth Conservatives, who said, let's not be coy about it. National issues were a part of the dilemma people were facing. John Mallinson, leader of Carlisle City Council in the Cumberland area. I think it's not just Partygate. There is an integrity issue. Basically, I just don't feel people any longer have the confidence that the Prime Minister can be relied upon to tell the truth. That's not journalists or the opposition speaking. That's your own local council leaders who were defeated today.
It's really important that we listen to them, and it's really important that we listen to our constituents and our voters and find out what it is that they're trying to tell us. My message is just that it will be slightly more nuanced than we expect, and often local issues will be in play as well. Having said that, it's often the case, rather oddly, you might say, that perhaps because we go through the listening exercise and make the necessary changes to policy, that we as a party often do very well at general elections immediately after a bad set
Well,
of
what if the
local
message is that your leader is the problem? What if that is the message? Are you listening to that message?
Boris was clearly a huge winner for us at the last general election. We've seen him win repeatedly over his entire career in politics, often against the odds. He's a prime minister who performs very well in very difficult circumstances, as we're seeing.
But not this
example,
time.
his response to Ukraine. Well, I think it's far too early to say that. I really do.
We've only got 3 councils to go, with respect. OK, well, let me try something else. What about the cost of living issues? I put it to you that your government has misjudged the extent to which the voting public expects help in this situation. You set a high bar during the furlough scheme, during the pandemic. The public now expects more help when it's receiving £200 a month direct debits for energy, and you have given some help, but the public is saying to you it's not enough.
I think it's really important, and this is why I want this government to stay in power and Boris Johnson to stay as our leader, that we tackle the cost of living issues, which are really serious and affecting all levels of society, with all the seriousness and all the energy that we can. We have started by giving significant help, often very targeted help, through the local authorities that we've been electing today. We know that that's what works. We learnt that repeatedly during COVID, that if you want to get help to those that need it most, do it via their local authority. So we're very much doing that. There's other help available. Pension credits are often a really good way of getting money to pensioners who are also really
Forgive me, Minister. I just want to draw you on one quick thing. You're a minister in Oxfordshire, and we've seen this sort of, if you like, perhaps realignment, counter-realignment against your successors in the Red Wall in some of the true blue seats. And I just wonder if you see that, if you see now a structural problem for the Conservatives in places like Oxfordshire, in the London home counties, and do you recognise that, or are you in denial about it?
It's a really complicated picture in Oxfordshire. So today we've seen Labour make some gains in Banbury, but we've also seen the Liberals make some gains and the odd Green. However, I would say that we are still in overall control, my party's still in overall control of the very efficient, very Conservative-minded Cherwell District Council, very pro-growth, really, one of our exemplar district councils. So I do think it's right that we listen to people. Of course, many of our core voters have not come out and voted for us this time, and we need to drill down as to why that is. But that will be for a myriad of reasons.
Okay.
And many of those reasons will be local ones.
We must leave that there. Thanks very much for your time, Victoria Prentice, there, the Minister. Now, the most immediately consequential election results are still being counted in Northern Ireland. The results seem to be on course to confirm a moment in history, with nationalists favouring Northern Ireland becoming part of the Republic of Ireland, taking the top spot over the Democratic Unionist Party and eligible to nominate Sinn Féin's Michelle O'Neill as First Minister. The DUP looks to fall into second place after being squeezed by other unionists. All of this has significant consequences for whether a new executive can be formed at Stormont, the future of the Brexit deal, in particular the Northern Ireland Protocol, the future of the Good Friday Agreement, and British diplomatic relations with the likes of the US. David Grossman has been talking to the key players in Belfast today, and a warning: his report contains some flashing images.
The outcome of the Northern Ireland Assembly election can be found somewhere in these piles of votes. The result, though, has to be teased out by hundreds of tellers performing count after count. It's a process you can't rush.
In this hall in Belfast, a full third of the Northern Ireland Assembly will be counted. At the moment, the early indications are about turnout. Which side of the community divide has got more of its vote out?
Sinn Féin on course to become the largest party is, of course, big news. They've done it with message discipline to reassure the wary. There are, however, a few reminders of the old Northern Ireland. Jerry Kelly, convicted of the Old Bailey bomb attack in 1973, now waiting for the verdict of the people.
Exciting day, interesting day.
Well, elections, I was going to say elections are always exciting, that's not necessarily true. But we did the work. We're happy with the work we've done. Now we're going to find out what the people have said, and that's what it comes down to.
Nerves for the DUP. Their vote has taken a hit, but any new Northern Ireland executive will require them to participate and nominate a Deputy First Minister.
And do you think the DUP will nominate?
We need to get action on the protocol. which removes the barriers between Great Britain and Northern Ireland that should never exist and do not exist in any other part of the world where one part of a nation has a customs border with another part of the same nation. That has to go, and that's something that we really need some proper action from the UK government over the course of the next number of days.
The Northern Ireland Protocol has split unionist politics. The DUP are now outflanked by the TUV, traditional unionist voice.
And if the result of today, and we're a long way off that, if the result is that because of the split in the unionist vote, that Sinn Féin are the largest party, would that be an outcome that is acceptable for you?
No, it's not acceptable. It was the rise of Sinn Féin and nationalism that has gave TUV the momentum that we have today. We started this election off from a base of no votes, and we've now got tens of thousands of votes right across the province. And I think that our stance on the protocol, our stance on the lack of delivery by unionist politicians at Stormont has almost brought the DUP to our position.
The Alliance Party, neutral on the question of whether Northern Ireland should be part of the UK or a united Ireland, is doing very well today. Their leader, Naomi Long, is the centre of attention when she arrives for her count.
Can I ask you, what do you think you offer? What do you offer, do you think, to the voters here that the other parties don't?
I think we're offering them positive politics, we're offering them pragmatism, and we're offering them hope of better. And I think people want that. I think they know that 24 years on from the Good Friday Agreement, we need to get beyond just managing divisions. We need to get to the point where we're resolving them and able to actually serve our communities, and that's what it's about.
But however well the Alliance Party do, it's unlikely their leader will ever be First or Deputy First Minister.
This has been a long time coming, but Alliance has been growing in recent years and they're finally achieving a breakthrough. The difficulty for Alliance will be changing the rules that are oriented towards unionism versus nationalism. The Good Friday Agreement rules barely recognise the other bloc that Alliance represents. Coming third place in an Assembly election won't allow Alliance to change the rules that they so dearly want.
At this cross-community youth centre in Belfast, they're watching the results. These young people have only known the post-Troubles power-sharing Assembly era, but they want Northern Ireland to move forward again.
Laws around how a party can veto need updated and need changed, because people can walk out on something as simple as not agreeing with the weather is that day, and it's not fair anymore for the people.
As the generations go down, the connection to those years and the trauma becomes progressively less and less, and then you see less necessarily thinking about the green and orange divide.
It would be within the benefit of Northern Ireland to make sure that the system does get a bit of an overhaul and actually just looked at. We're not asking for the whole thing to be scrapped, because that's just not going to work. But what we are, I would say, asking is for it to just be reviewed for the better interests. We can't keep having this stop-start nature, which is caused by, I would say, this tribalist image of Northern Ireland.
But that is perhaps a question for another day. For Sinn Féin, this has been an extraordinary journey that few predicted, and even fewer are confident they know where it will end.
And David joins me right now. Are we certain, David, that Sinn Féin are going to end up the largest party?
I think we're as certain as we can be, Faisal. We've had 40 out of 90 seats declared so far. Northern Ireland, the Assembly is elected on quite a complex alternative preference vote system where people put their first to fifth preferences down and then votes are reallocated in 18 different constituencies. And so far, Sinn Féin are on 16, the DUP on 10, the Alliance Party on 7, the UUP, the Ulster Unionist Party on 4, there's others on 2, and the SDLP on 1 at the moment. That last one I read out, the SDLP, gives you a suggestion of what's happened here, really. The once main nationalist party in Northern Ireland has been squeezed. It's been squeezed by Sinn Féin's vote. Sinn Féin managed to reassure a lot of nationalists that actually they were going to govern in a way that they would be comfortable with, talking about things like the economy, things like transport, and things like the cost of living squeeze. And I think the unionist side kind of help that process happen by emphasising the prospect of unless people voted for the DUP were telling people you'll get a Sinn Féin First Minister. And I think a lot of SDLP voters thought that sounded like a good idea. If there was a prospect of that happening, they wanted a part of it. So I think it's been a range of issues that have pushed Sinn Féin into the direction of being the top dog in Northern Ireland politics at the moment. And it is an extraordinary result.
So if we do get a Sinn Féin First Minister, does that then take us closer towards United Ireland?
Well, it doesn't, I suppose, take us further away from that prospect, but there is still a long way to go. And as I said, Sinn Féin didn't emphasise constitutional matters in their election campaign. They talked about much more bread and butter issues. And even if Sinn Féin did want to push towards that objective, and of course it is the overriding objective of their party and their movement, there are barriers along the way. Not least, it's not up to them to call a border poll. The second thing is it's divisions in the unionist side of the equation that have led to them being the biggest vote. The unionist vote was split three ways. The nationalist vote was hardly, as I mentioned, split at all. And if you tot up the numbers of unionists and the number of nationalists in the new assembly, as we think it's going to be, actually the nationalist side may have fallen back in total slightly. And the final hurdle on a border poll is it's up to the UK government to allow it to be called. And the polls suggest there hasn't been a big movement in the last 5 years in favour of having a border poll. But still, make no mistake, huge political event. A party that not so long ago, in my lifetime reporting for the BBC, I was banned from using their words. It was regarded by the British government as the political wing of a terrorist organisation, is well on its way to being the biggest party in the Northern Ireland Assembly, and that is a massive political event.
Well, thanks very much, David Grossman, reporting there outside a gloriously lit Stormont. And I'm joined now from the Jordanstown Counts by Alliance MP Stephen Farry, and from Belfast by Emma Little-Pengelly, the former DUP MP and former Special Advisor to Arlene Foster, and to Peter Robinson. So, same question to both of you. Seems like a seismic moment for Northern Ireland and therefore for the politics of the whole of the UK. Stephen.
Yes, I mean, this is certainly for the Alliance Party and the wider centre ground, this is certainly a momentous day. We have been growing steadily over the past couple of decades, but we've now made major breakthroughs, and we're now somewhere in the teens in terms of the number of seats. And that's a very clear signal that there's a growing number of people who wish to move away from binary politics. People are moving away from the two traditions of unionism and nationalism, and who want a different type of approach that's based upon liberal progressive values and addressing the social and economic issues that are facing people today, like they are other people right throughout the United Kingdom.
And Emma, how does the DUP approach this moment?
Well, obviously it's a disappointing day for the DUP. They're likely to lose a number of seats. But of course the margins on this were always very, very tight. So it looks likely that actually Sinn Féin may not increase their seats, and if they do, it'll just be by one. The DUP is likely to lose at least 2, possibly 3, but those small movements are enough to change that position between the DUP being First Minister and Sinn Féin being Deputy First Minister. And key in this election, of course, has been the protocol. So what we've seen is a fracturing of the unionist vote, while actually the nationalist vote has consolidated around Sinn Féin. It's taking votes from the SDLP. We've seen the Alliance Party in the centre consolidating very much the centre vote. It's been a very bad day for those grand old parties of the peace process, the SDLP and the Ulster Unionist Party, both significantly losing out to the Alliance Party. So that consolidation happening in the centre. But in the unionist side of things, what we've seen is a fracturing, particularly in relation to the issue of the protocol. So to the DUP's right, you have the TUV, quite a hard-line party, which has very much put out its stall to be absolutely against the protocol. And what we've seen is some DUP votes, significant enough going towards the TUV. They'll not gain a lot of seats, but what it has done is cost the DUP seats, which has been picked up by other parties. Okay. And that has resulted in this turnaround.
We'll come back to the issue of the protocol in a moment, but just in terms of this prospect of a Sinn Féin First Minister. Will the DUP be able to work with the Sinn Féin First Minister? How will that work, Emma?
Well, the DUP, of course, have been in government since 2007 with Sinn Féin in the office of First and Deputy First Minister. I'm not clear as to what Jeffrey Donaldson's position would be on this, but of course what he is saying tonight is that, look, this issue is at this stage not relevant because he is not going back in to government in Northern Ireland without movement in relation to the protocol. Now, all of the unionist parties, the Ulster Unionist Party, DUP and TUV, all set out a stall of being anti-protocol, but the DUP and TUV made clear that they wouldn't be going in and operating Stormont until the protocol was resolved.
Okay.
There's been a significant vote for those two parties. The unionist designation will still be the largest designation, but the fracturing of the unionist vote is really leading into Sinn Féin getting the First Minister position. But there's been a very strong anti-protocol vote in Northern Ireland in this election.
As I said, we'll come back to that. Stephen, let me bring you in, because obviously with the sort of community-based structures that are inherent of the Stormont arrangements, your party misses out despite its good performance on the higher echelons of power at Stormont. Are you saying that they need to be changed? How would they be changed? Would that be a change to the Good Friday Agreement?
Well, we are fundamental supporters of the Good Friday Agreement, but the mechanisms need to change with the times and reflect a much more diverse Northern Ireland. So the current arrangements are lacking legitimacy, certainly based upon the growing alliance vote and indeed some other factors too. So simply dividing up MLAs based upon unionism and nationalism sometimes is a recipe for gridlock. So we need to look at our structures to see if we can do government a lot better in Northern Ireland. And if I may, on the issue of the protocol, it's important to bear in mind that this will be negotiated between the UK government and the European Commission. The Northern Ireland Assembly does not have a direct role, so anyone refusing to set up government on the basis of the protocol are letting down the people of Northern Ireland, who are facing huge issues in terms of the cost of living and their health service. There's a real urgency there. And while certainly unionism is very exercised around this, we have to appreciate that the protocol exists for a very clear reason. It reflects the nature of Brexit itself and the hard Brexit that was chosen both by the UK government and by the DUP, and any hard Brexit will require some form of special arrangement for Northern Ireland, whether it's called a protocol or something else. That's the basic law of Brexit that we have to take into account. And the vast majority of people in Northern Ireland are pragmatic.
Let me put that directly to Emma. You know, this was sort of hoist up your own petard. You were a DUP MP at the time, ushered in Boris Johnson, this harder Brexit deal that necessitated the Irish sea border and the protocol. And this is the result.
Two quick things. First of all, of course, you know, it was a choice between Boris Johnson and Jeremy Corbyn. We know where Jeremy Corbyn stood in relation to the Irish question. So therefore, there wasn't really an option there. We worked with Boris Johnson because he was the Prime Minister. We wanted him to bring about a good Brexit and a good Brexit deal. He didn't. He put the Irish border down the Irish Sea. It's just not acceptable. I think the key thing for people to remember here is that if this border was on the island of Ireland between Northern Ireland and the Republic, Sinn Féin would certainly not be sitting in Stormont. They would not be operating these institutions. And yet the message from some of these other parties has been dismissive of concerns about the Irish sea border. And I think in this election that has caused the fracturing. That's directly leading to instability, and it needs to be addressed.
Well, we must leave that there. Thank you so much for joining us there, Emma Little-Pengelly, and also Stephen Farry there too. Now, what do the results mean for the party leaders, the parties they lead, for the balance of power across the country and for all of us who live in it? Let's get an expert assessment from a former Labour Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, Sean Woodward, the political scientist, Matthew Goodwin, and the former Conservative Education Secretary, Justine Greening. Now, Sean Woodward, let's just get you quickly on the Northern Ireland issue. How big a moment is this in terms of the prospect of Sinn Féin winning?
Well, I think this is both an exciting moment and it's a huge test. It's exciting because this is the outcome of the Good Friday Agreement. Democracy is happening. People of Northern Ireland have voted, and it looks like Sinn Féin is going to be the largest party. That means they have the right to nominate themselves as First Minister. It's a huge test for Jeffrey Donaldson. What's he going to do? What the DUP going to do? Let's remember the DUP, of course, never signed up to the Good Friday Agreement. They came to it late in the day. It's a huge test for everybody, but I think, as the Taoiseach has said, what really matters now is that everyone recognises this is democracy. You may not have got the result you wanted. The real test is, are you going to make it work? And there's one other dimension to this. This is going to require probably the involvement of the Prime Minister to make sure it does work. And I have long felt one of Boris Johnson's biggest problems, his Achilles heel, is he doesn't understand the politics of Northern Ireland. So this plays into today, because I think the next year is going to be about Harry Macmillan's events, dear boy. And events are going to be a real problem for this Prime Minister.
OK, well, that's very helpful to hear that reflection from a former Northern Ireland Secretary. Let's talk to you, Matthew Goodwin. I remember talking to you 5, 6, 7 years ago about the realignment you spotted on the left of the former Labour supporters in working class areas heading straight over to UKIP. Put it to you today that realignment has itself realigned, and you're getting some different results that are quite interesting. Wales, the northwest of England, maybe sort of Rossendale and Cumberland, heading back towards Labour. Other parts, maybe the northeast, Yorkshire, staying with the Conservatives. So things are evolving, changing.
Yeah, I think that's certainly true. I think we're just seeing the next phase of the realignment. We're seeing university graduates, more leafy, prosperous, true blue Conservative areas turning to Labour, Lib Dems. But we are seeing those northern areas in the Midlands where Labour actually fell back in these elections stay, not necessarily strongly loyal, but stay rallied around the Conservatives. So I think now the Conservative Party has to make a decision, because the Conservative Party is almost certainly going to lose a considerable amount of territory in the south east around London. So does the Conservative Party now want to lean into this realignment and expand parts of the north and the Midlands and areas which I think the party could still do at the cost of those southern seats? Now, it's up to the Conservatives as to whether they want to make that choice.
Is it that simple? I mean, Workington man, that famous sort of, archetype. Workington, pretty leafy. Workington's gone back to Labour.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I think we have to remember firstly about local elections generally is 2011, 2012, 2013, 2014, 2016, 2018, 2019, Labour either led the Conservatives in the projected national vote share or were joined with the Conservatives. So generally, they've not been a great predictor. During all of that, we've seen the 2015 Conservative majority, the 2017 Conservative largest party, the 2019 Conservative majority. So let's not read sort of too much into these.
Hang on a minute. Back then, the other party, main party, was UKIP, which the Conservatives then squeezed, incorporated the vote, did very well, won a 2015 general election. This time, as we've been saying, it's Lib Dems and Greens, which are surely sort of more ripe fruit for the Labour Party to squeeze at a general election.
They don't only take votes from the Conservatives, though. Keep this in mind. There could easily be some serious fragmentation.
Let me bring in Justine Greening. Let me just on the flip side of this realignment. Of course, you were famously MP in Wandsworth. Now that's turned. What do you make of that? Wandsworth going Labour.
Well, obviously gutted for all the Conservative activists who worked tirelessly over the years. And of course, the council was lost by the local Conservatives, but won by a Labour Party that basically said, we'll do exactly the same with your council tax, we'll still cut it. So it wasn't one with a distinctive Labour message. It was won by a Labour Party that said, we'll be exactly the same as the local Conservatives. I think the broader challenge, though, for the Conservative Party is that Boris Johnson has won elections. Of course, he won in London and built his career on being a mayor here in London, but he's won that by building a coalition. And I think the concern from the results overnight and today is that the signs are that coalition isn't holding. The only seat that Labour won from the Conservatives in 2019 was my seat when I stood down in Putney. But overnight and today we've seen the coalition under pressure in Scotland, of course in London, in the south, in the southeast, in Worthing, in Wales. Now, that is something that will have to be addressed by the Conservative Party if it's going to have a good chance of winning again in the next election. What you can't do in politics is what I've heard some people suggesting today, which is somehow to write off whole parts of the country, go, oh, well, that's London. Those people don't vote for us, or these kinds of people don't vote for us, they're graduates. That way lies to fishing in a smaller and smaller and smaller pool of voters. And in the end, there just aren't enough to be able to win. So the big question for the Conservatives is how they reach that wider coalition. And that, I think, means making levelling up a strategy that is relevant to every single part of the country, not just the North and the Midlands.
Well, I mean, you have skin in the game here. Levelling up was your phrase, and you even suggested it to Boris Johnson, a birdie tells me. But isn't the answer that we've received today is that it doesn't mean much to large swathes of the electorate? If anything.
It doesn't mean anything to people in London because, of course, they've been told by the Conservatives in many respects that levelling up isn't about them. That's what people in Worthing have heard, I'm sure, as well. And the reality is, if you're living in those parts of the country, what is the message that you get from the Conservatives about why you should vote for them? Because it is all about levelling up. But actually, the message is that's not the people who aren't in the North or the Midlands. And so the key is making that a message that is relevant to everyone. And it should be, because it is about achieving equality of opportunity. And that's as relevant where I'm sat here in London as it is where I grew up in Rotherham.
OK, so we talk about realignment. Let me put to you, if you look at the numbers, just look at the maths of what's happening today, and actually maybe last year's elections too, for your party, the Labour Party, don't you see some logic, by hook or by crook, in some sort of progressive alliance to counter this realignment that Matthew and Justine have talked about?
You could make that case. I think if you're Keir Starmer this evening, I think you've got to recognise that you did incredibly well in London. I mean, what happened in London is very, very significant. It's symbolic. There are areas of the country that clearly we need to do a lot more in. But again, let's also remember that where I disagree with what Victoria said, there's no question it wasn't local issues on which people voted yesterday. Yeah. They are voting on big issues chiefly.
It's the Lib Dems benefiting more.
When we see the people come out who didn't vote yesterday, let's remember we had very large numbers of people who didn't vote, who will vote in a general election, many of them in the north of England. I think we're going to see them come Labour's way. Okay. That doesn't mean to say that it's job done. It's anything but job done. The person tonight who should be really concerned is Boris Johnson, and the person who should be really concerned around Boris Johnson is the number 10 team. And what's coming out of the number 10 team tonight, I think, is complacency. And we saw that in the 1990s, and that's really dangerous. And I think from Keir Starmer's point of view, what he's got to do now is build on the success of yesterday.
Well, Keir Starmer will also be obviously concerned, and some of his supporters concerned, about this issue of this potential fine from the police.
Yeah, absolutely. And let's be really clear about that. Unless he's a fool, and I don't think that Keir Starmer is a fool, he would not have said what he'd said about Boris Johnson in the last few months. The police have taken a decision now to investigate. I don't think that Keir Starmer should be worried about that, because from everything I know about this, he's actually not in the position that Boris Johnson was in. Boris Johnson was in a position where, on a serial basis, he went to parties, he had bring a bottle. What happened there was effectively people ate, there was a glass of beer. At the end of the day, they were campaigning in local elections. This was not a bring a bottle party.
Should he resign if he's fined?
Well, that's a matter for him, but I don't...
He said that the Prime Minister should resign.
I think his position,
even for the investigation.
I think his position clearly, should he find himself the wrong side of the law, would be extremely difficult. Of course it would.
Well, I'm sorry, we must leave it here. There's literally hours we could talk to with this excellent panel, but that is all from us for tonight. The election counting continues on the BBC News, and Kirsty's back here on Monday. Till then, have a very good weekend. Good night.